Hello, everyone. Welcome. We will begin promptly at 12:05. Hello, welcome, everyone.
Hello.
We'll begin at 12:05. If you don't mind, please muting your computers. Hello, welcome, everyone. We will start promptly at 12:05. All right. Welcome, everyone. It is 12:05, and we're going to begin our event today, our bilingual urban nature walk. Please keep yourself muted throughout the event, and whenever we have Q&As, we'll have the audience Q&A at the end of the event. So during this event, if you want to go ahead and submit questions, you're welcome to do that in the chat box at the bottom of the screen. This meeting will be recorded for those that are unable to join in today. So I just want to start off by saying I'm Adriana Garcia. I am the Nature Accessibility Advocate at Park Pride, and I am over the Nature for All Atlanta initiative, which I will go into in a little bit. But first and foremost, I wanted to let you know that we are using a streamer service for translation and captioning for our Spanish-speaking participants. This will allow you to see Spanish translation while also using Zoom for the video portion. The instructions for this was sent out in your email yesterday evening. If you have any questions about that, feel free to put that in the chat box below. And so next, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Michelle Diaz of Trees Atlanta, and she will be welcoming you guys in Spanish. Next slide.
Buenas tardes a todos, mi nombre es Michelle Díaz y yo soy la gerente de programas educativos de Trees Atlanta. Nací y crecí en Puerto Rico y ahora me encuentro aquí en Atlanta. Y nuestra misión en Trees Atlanta es proteger y mejorar los bosques forestales de Atlanta a través de la siembra, la conservación y la educación. Durante este evento estaré mirando y contestando preguntas en el chat. So, siéntase en la confianza de escribir las preguntas en español. Y si tiene algún problema, alguna dificultad con el sistema de traducción que Adriana acaba de mencionar, por favor, escríbelo aquí en el chat y yo podré estar ayudándole. También las preguntas van a estar siendo contestadas al final. Las preguntas hacia los instructores van a estar siendo contestadas al final del evento y yo podré traducir eso también para ellos. Gracias a Huawei y a Park Pride por esta colaboración. Espero que disfruten este evento.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. We're going to jump right in. We actually have a video to share with you guys. Our main focus today is on the Hampton-Beecher Hills Nature Preserve, which is on the west side of Atlanta. If you haven't had an opportunity to check out this nature preserve, this video will give you an opportunity to kind of see what it looks like without actually stepping foot out in the park. This is one of my favorite parks in the city. It has both a walking trail and also it has wooded trails as well. And it just has a lot of different features that I really appreciate. So I'm just gonna turn that video on and allow you guys to see what it's all about. The first thing I noticed when I stopped into the park were these bushes of blackberries. And as a kid, I used to love eating the blackberries in the woods behind my house. It was a nice, pleasant surprise. This is one of the wooded trails that you can access through the beginning of the Hampton-Beecher Trail. If you pass the playground, it's right before you get to the playground to the right. There's not a sign for it, so you have to keep an eye out for it. But it's a great place to get out during the week, get away from the city and feel like you're in a you're out in the woods somewhere without even leaving the city. And I should add that this video is actually taken on a GoPro, so it is a little bit shaky, and I apologize about that. But I really wanted to get the the full view in sight, and GoPros are great for the wide angle, so hope it's not too bad. There's lots of cool mushrooms and fungus that you see along the way. I don't actually know what they're called, but in a little bit, Taryn from Trees Atlanta will be speaking about the different plants and other species found on the property. So you can look forward to learning more about that. There's some really large trees on this property, and I really enjoy the shade from that. And just looking at them, during this this day that I actually went on this walk, I saw a whole pack of a deer. So I thought that was really exciting, being that I am, 10 minutes from downtown, 15 minutes from downtown. I saw these wild animals right here in Atlanta. And this is actually bamboo, and Taryn will talk a little bit about that as well. And English ivy that's growing on the trees. One of my favorite features about this park is the creek. Wawa will actually explain a little bit more about this creek in a little bit. But it's just a calming and relaxing place to be, and you can even take a back trail to get down to the water, which you'll see shortly. So I took an actual back trail and I walked down to the banks of the creek, and was able to even get in the water a little bit. Just a really nice place to get away, especially during this pandemic. These type of spaces have been a great place to go and just kind of get away and get out of the house. I'm sure you guys can relate with that. And that's going to be it for our video portion. I really hope you guys enjoyed taking that virtual walk through the Hampton-Beecher Nature Preserve. Next, I'm going to just jump right in and share a little bit about myself and about the work I'm doing with Park Pride and our partnership that we have with Trees Atlanta, West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, and it's funded by the Turner Foundation. Marlena, do you mind putting my slides on? Great, thank you so much. So just a little bit of background about myself. I grew up in a small town in Tennessee, in a very wooded area. We spent a lot of time as a family at our local parks. One or two of them I specifically remember, one being the Imagination Station. It was a park that was a couple minutes from my house, and it was just great for kids. We ran around and played all day long there. And I remember specifically in our school, we were able to carve our hands out of the fencing that was around the park. And I remember that being a really influential time to me. I was able to feel like I was a part of this park. And there was another one also called the Tennessee River Park. It's right along the river of the Tennessee River. And we were able to make fish that were imprinted on the walls of the building at the Tennessee River Park. And that's something that I feel very proud of. Even as an adult, I can go back to these spaces and see that I had some kind of impact on them. And as an adult, I realize it's so important for children to have these spaces, as well as adults. And you know, we're seeing that especially now during the pandemic that we need these parks and green spaces to get outside and to heal and to rest and you know, feel a part of nature. So, you know, that very much had an influence in my life, and I hope that, you know, the work that Park Pride is doing and Nature for All Atlanta will help in creating more of those spaces and make them more welcoming. So just a really quick run through of what Park Pride is. It's a local nonprofit that supports communities across Atlanta in caring for their neighborhood parks. The basis of our work is supporting local Friends of the Parks groups, most of which are made of entirely volunteers. And we do that in a number of ways, including giving matching grants for park improvements, organizing volunteers, lending professional park design services, providing learning opportunities, and also resources, advocating for more resources for public parks and trails. We believe that communities are the experts of their own parks in their neighborhoods, so we respond to their unique needs. I'm sorry. Marlene, do you mind going to the next slide? So as mentioned before, I am the nature accessibility advocate, and I am over an initiative called Nature for All Atlanta. This is an initiative that is put forth by Park Pride, Trees Atlanta, and West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, and it's funded by the Turner Foundation. Basically, our mission is to advance a vision of Atlanta with a protected tree canopy and residents with equitable access to an interconnected networks of parks, green spaces, urban forests, and trails. Next slide, please. You're wondering, why does this initiative deserve your attention? One, because nature is good for people's health. And as we've seen, there's lots of mental and physical health benefits, including lower blood pressure, lower levels of stress, improved mood and focus, a boosted immune system, improved sleep, increased energy level, and so much more. These are spaces that families and neighbors can gather and play and relax and combat social isolation. And as mentioned before, I know, you know, during this pandemic, it's especially been helpful for us to be able to get out of the house and, you know, be able to utilize these parks and green spaces in our neighborhoods. Two, everybody deserves access to nature. The health and societal benefits of access to nature must be shared equitably across Atlanta's diverse communities. And three, nature in Atlanta is at risk and must be protected and enhanced. And for those that don't know, the city of Atlanta put forth a stated goal of obtaining 50% tree canopy coverage. Trees and vegetation filter and clean the air. Trees are the lungs of the city, and currently the city is losing trees faster than they are being replaced. Next slide, please. We're achieving this through education, engagement, empowerment, and advocacy. And as far as events go, if you look under empowerment, we've actually had a couple events like the one that you're attending right now. We actually had one before the pandemic started. It was a birding and storytelling event with Jason Ward, and it was at the Cascade Springs Nature Preserve. And there was a couple of young nature leaders that were there telling their stories of what it's like to be a nature leader. And we had over 45 people there, most of which had said they had never birded before. And also a lot of them had never come to a Park Pride event. So I would consider that a very successful event. We've also done a Park Pride roundtable, as well as a Southwest Atlanta tree talk, which happened last month. Next slide, please. So in closing, I really just want to reiterate how important it is to make these outdoor spaces inclusive and welcoming to all people. We all recreate differently. And it's important for us to be accepting and welcoming to everyone. And so I hope that the work that we're doing with Park Pride and Nature for Atlanta can continue to help make these spaces welcoming and more accessible for everyone. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nataki. She is a co-founder and board chairperson at the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance.
Thank you so much, Adriana, for passing the mic, as well as for the opportunity for Wawa to serve as a partner for today's event. I'd like to talk just very briefly about a little bit of the history associated with the Hampton-Beecher Hills Nature Preserve. And my colleague, Anna Marie Shreves, will be joining me in just a few minutes. And Marlena, if you could pull up the first slide, that would be wonderful. So in terms of a little bit of history about the Hampton-Beecher Hills Nature Preserve, it is a little under 200 acres. And as Adriana already mentioned, this is on the west side of Atlanta, in Southwest Atlanta. It really is a community treasure and jewel because the community that lives around this nature preserve has really fought or had fought for over 30 years to keep this area from being developed. Initially, there were plans to build apartment complexes, and really at the time that Wawa got very involved with this site, it was slated for the development of 121 single-family homes. These were slated to be homes that would have sort of a $500,000 price tag, and it would have been inside of a gated community. The community surrounding this nature preserve is a solid, sort of middle class neighborhood in terms of a lot of the immediate homes. But as you kind of span a little bit further out from the preserve itself, you see a lot of diversity in terms of income levels in the community. And so even for the very close by neighbors who live in that really solidly middle class neighborhood, the threat of $500,000 homes really meant a lot of concerns that people had about property values. And you had a lot of retirees in the area, people who were on fixed incomes. And so that challenge of dramatically raising the property values, which was a huge issue that people were contending with. The other challenge is that people really just wanted to see the property kept as green space. I mentioned before that there had been other plans to develop things like apartment complexes, and so they were they had sort of equal opportunity opposition, if you will, to different types of built structures being built in this property. They wanted to see it overwhelmingly kept as green space. There were some community members who didn't mind a little bit of development, but they really wanted to see the majority of the property maintained as green space. And Wawa really got involved with this because a former board member and executive director, Bruce Morton, lived in one of the neighborhoods adjacent to, and he told these stories of how he played on this property as a kid. He rode his bike, and when he heard about the potential development of these 121 homes, he really wanted to engage upon a campaign to save this childhood property that gave him so much joy. He just wanted to save this place where he used to ride his bike. And with Wawa, we thought that was a worthy cause. In part because we were concerned about equity issues around community residents and their ability to be able to stay in place when this new development, would come aboard. We were also very concerned about the topography of the land. In many places, it's very hilly. There were lots of challenges with respect to, having sort of one entrance and one exit to the community. That would be important from a kind of an emergency emergency response sort of standpoint. Also, we were concerned about traffic as well as potential pollution that might impact Utoy Creek. And Adriana showed in her video earlier some beautiful shots of Utoy Creek, which is 26 miles long, and it covers a lot of the Cascade and Southwest Atlanta corridor and goes down into East Point. And so because the creek runs onto this property, we were also very concerned about potential pollution to Utoy Creek that would be associated with the development. And there were lots of other things that really made saving this land really important. The land backs up to Beecher Hills Elementary School, hence part of the name, Lionel Hampton Beecher Hills. And then the Beecher Hills, the Lionel Hampton part of the property is named for the late jazz great Lionel Hampton, who actually owned part of this property. And he worked early on with the Path Foundation, which established the Lionel Hampton Trail years before this property was saved as a nature preserve. So in the early 2000s, Wawa was able to launch a multi-stakeholder campaign to save the property. I will have to say that our local elected officials at that time, there were two who covered part of this area in Southwest Atlanta, and neither one of them were in favor of developing, of keeping this land, as green space. They were looking at the potential for housing development, in the area. And quite frankly, one of the city council members' daughter actually worked with the real estate firm that was going to sell these houses. So there were some questions about, kind of personal interest in this property and in that project. But what I can give them credit for is when these two elected officials called a community meeting to hear from the residents of this area about their interest and their concerns. They heard overwhelmingly from the community residents that they wanted to see this property saved as green space, and then those city council members got behind the citizens. They got behind the residents to make sure that we could access monies to try to save this property in perpetuity. So I give them a lot of credit for really hearing the needs and wants of the community and getting behind it. And so after they got behind it, we were able to tap into some public sources of funding. And then Wawa, as an all-volunteer run organization, before we gained our 501c3 status, were successful in helping to raise over $2.5 million to put onto the purchase of this land, to keep it saved in perpetuity, and to make it a part of the City of Atlanta Parks inventory. So this is a huge, we thought that this was a huge success, not only for Wawa, but for the community, because we did it together. We had some non-traditional partners at the table as well. One of those partners was the Civil War Commission, and on this property, you can still see some of the remnants of fortifications that were used by the Union Army during the Civil War, during the Battle of Utoy Creek, as well as the Battle of Ezra Church. So they were kind of an unlikely partner, and initially when we brought them in, the city council members sort of raised their eyebrows until they heard that in terms of preserving the history of this site, we would be preserving, Union fortifications as opposed to preserving and sort of highlighting anything that would have been championed by the Confederate Army. So that's kind of a funny little story that goes into, the way that we were able to pull together a myriad of stakeholders to make this happen. One other last thing that I'll mention is that this site is very close to the former kind of Peyton Wall, which was known as Atlanta's Berlin Wall. There were barricades that were erected around, I believe it was around 1962, when Mayor Ivan Allen was hearing from residents of the Peyton Forest community. This was an affluent white community at this time. And when the first Black person bought property in this community, they really wanted to see sort of a separation between sort of where he was and sort of the white part of the community. And so it's kind of it puts a black eye on Atlanta in terms of our history. It was taken down, after some advocacy to make that so, but there is a lot of history sort of tied to this site directly, as well as the neighborhoods around it. So I will stop there in terms of the history and sort of pass the mic on to my colleague Anna Marie Shreves, who will talk about some of the history that continues to evolve through the work that Wawa is doing on this property as a part, and we call it a part of the Atlanta Children's Forest Network.
Thank you, Nataki, and buenos everyone. I'll talk a bit about Atlanta Children's Forest Network, which the Hampton-Beecher Nature Preserve is a part of. And what that is 355 acres of protected green space in Southwest Atlanta. It includes 3 nature or green spaces within within a mile from each other. And the first one is the Hampton-Beecher Nature Preserve. There's also Cascade Springs Nature Preserve, which was talked a bit about earlier, thanks to Adriana. And yes, we did host a Nature for All event there, I believe in February. And then there's also the 26 acres of the Outdoor Activity Center, which is on Richland Road in the historic Bush Mountain neighborhood, which is the one of the first Black settlements in Atlanta post the Civil War. And so there's a lot of history that is tied to the green spaces. And I do want to acknowledge that these spaces are also initially are settled on originally Muscogee Creek native lands. And I think that's important to bring up because the Muscogee people did rely heavily on creeks as a form of sustenance and livelihood. They were known to create agriculture that centered around the waterways of the creeks. And so I wanted to make sure that I brought them into the scope as well. And then for the Atlanta Children's Forest Network, Wawa hinged the idea of the project on children needing physical, mental, and social health benefits, and how they could get those benefits through green spaces. And so that's why the Atlanta Children's Forest Network was created. And it is a partnership between the USDA Forest Service, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and us, Wawa, to be able to preserve those spaces so that youth can have alternatives and access, not just youth, but I think youth and families. We love to say that Wawa is K through gray, that everyone has access to the green spaces and the health benefits that come with being able to access green spaces. And it's important to note that all 3 of the properties that are within the Atlanta Children's Forest Network, Cascade Springs, Hampton-Beecher Trail and Preserve, as well as the Outdoor Activity Center, are all public transportation accessible. So that is that was an important piece to us. And so the initiative has an emphasis on underserved communities and making sure that they have access to forests in their neighborhoods. And that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Nataki and Anna Marie. I feel like I learned so much from that. I did not even know all of that history. So next we're going to turn it on over to Taryn Heidel. She is the Forest Restoration Project Coordinator at Trees Atlanta, and she's going to share more about what they do in the Hampton-Beecher Nature Preserve. She's just going to get her slides situated.
I forgot to unmute myself first, and then I couldn't unmute when I had the slides up. Okay. All right, hi everyone. My name's Taryn. Thanks for that introduction, and thank you so much, Anna Marie and Nataki, for giving us a history of the site and why it's so important to the community. I'm just going to go into a little bit about what Trees Atlanta does in Hampton-Beecher and also talk a lot about plants. I have a lot of slides for y'all. I kind of set it up so that it's more of like we're going through the park on a walk together, how I would do it if I was leading a nature walk. So I've got a lot of plants for you. I'm going to throw a lot of stuff at you. I'm sorry, I really love plants and I really wanted to get a lot of information to y'all. So with that being started, we're just going to go over like a few details first and then get to the juicy, beautiful pictures. Okay, so Trees Atlanta has been doing restoration work in the space since 2004. And what that means is we've done mostly invasive removal, native plantings, and in the past year or two, we've started holding monthly volunteer projects on Saturdays. The intent of that is to try to get regular volunteers so that they can feel like they are part of the site and help to make it a more beautiful place for future generations. So before I actually go into specific species, I'm gonna tell you kind of what the categories are. So there's native plants, invasive plants, and then we're gonna go over one non-native, non-invasive plant. So for those who don't know, native plants are, the way it's defined in the US is if a plant was here pre-colonialization, then it's native. And you can say something is native to the US, something is native to Georgia, something is native to the Piedmont region of Georgia. So you can get very specific with regions. But the idea is that it evolved here. So some landscaping plants that y'all would be familiar with that are native are blueberry bushes, red buds, echinacea or purple coneflower, and oak leaf hydrangea. Those are commonly found. Versus an invasive plant is one that wasn't from here, but not only isn't from here, because it wasn't from here, it didn't evolve the same way. And so when it's brought here, it doesn't have the same competition, it doesn't have the same predation. And so it grows out of control, it disrupts the plant communities and takes up space where native plants would be growing. So some common examples of this that people may have heard of are kudzu, English ivy, Chinese privet, and Chinese wisteria. And then a non-native plant would be a plant that's not from here, but it doesn't really take over an ecosystem the way invasive plants do. So most plants that are not from here would go in this category. Only a few plants that are not from here turn out to be invasive. The problem is you don't know until it's brought over here, and then it's kind of too late. So some examples of non-native plants that are not invasive are peach trees. So we're known as the peach state. Peach trees are from Asia. Asian azaleas are really commonly found in yards, although we have many native azaleas. I think we have 17 native to Georgia. Japanese maple and crepe myrtle. Okay, so why are native plants important? So the reason that plants are so important is because they are necessary for other components of an ecosystem. So when we're talking about bugs, a lot of bugs are specialists versus generalists. So a generalist would mean it'll eat anything. It doesn't really matter if it has kind of an evolutionary relationship with it or not. But some bugs are specialists, so they have to have those native plants that they've evolved with in order to flourish. And we need bugs because the bugs feed the birds and other mammals, and so the whole ecosystem kind of depends on these relationships. So one example would be caterpillars and butterflies. They tend to be specialists. And one example that a lot of people have heard of is the monarch butterfly and the milkweed plant. So because they've evolved together, they kind of have this arms race. So plants don't want to get eaten, and so they put out a defense mechanism. And so with that defense mechanism, most other animals or bugs that try to eat it will get harmed, except for that one that maybe has evolved that has that mutual benefit with the plant. So for instance, milkweed, you can see in this picture here, it releases this latex substance from the leaves. So any other caterpillar, when it's eating this bug, it gets the latex in its mouth and it actually seals the mouth of the caterpillar shut and it starves to death. But this caterpillar has evolved to kind of learn to seal off the veins of that leaf. And so the latex kind of bleeds out in front of it so it can eat safely without getting any latex in its mouth. And then the monarch butterfly pollinates the milkweed plant and lays eggs on the plant itself. So there's all these kinds of relationships with each and every plant. And a lot of them aren't one-on-one. Some trees will support hundreds of species of caterpillars and butterflies. And then caterpillars make up the majority of baby birds' diets, some up to 70%. Okay, so as we're walking through, I'm just gonna start on kind of a paved path, and then we're gonna go on the nature trail a little bit, but I'm gonna try to kind of like fly through and just show you some different categories of plants that you'll find there. So right at the entrance, this house has Chinese holly planted, which is an invasive ornamental that you can commonly buy at stores. And then not even 20 feet down, you can see this Chinese holly has naturalized and colonized further into the park. And there's other instances of that too, but I just thought it was interesting because they're literally right next to each other. English ivy was mentioned a bit earlier. That's really commonly used as a ground cover. So when it works its way into a forest, it prevents native plants, delicate native plants from growing on the ground layer. It also prevents like little tree saplings from popping up from the ground. But it also is more likely to make your tree fall down if it grows up your tree, because trunks don't normally have leaves on them. So when you put leaves on them, it kind of like acts like a wind sail. And so it's much more likely to fall in a storm event and really decrease the lifespan of your tree. Some other invasives that you'll find walking down are porcelainberry and Chinese wisteria. Those are other ones that are commonly purchased as ornamentals. So this is like actually the entrance to a forest, and it's created like this huge, massive curtain. We have an American wisteria. I know a lot of people love wisteria. We have a native one that's not aggressive and doesn't naturalize like this if you're interested. So this was on the other side of that curtain. This is some of the work that we've done. This is a pile that's still decomposing from last year from a bunch of climbing wisteria that we cut and treated. And then there's a bunch of English ivy and wisteria in the ground layer. That just goes to show that like this work is never ending. It's continuous and it will come back, and we need to keep coming back to take care of that land. So as I was walking down the trail, I saw these beautiful flowers on the ground. These are blooming right now. So if you notice them, now you know, but this is called trumpet vine. These flowers are great for hummingbirds. Hummingbirds love red flowers that have like this huge kind of trumpet shape. And this is the vine that's actually growing along this tree. So this flower blooms at the very tip top where there's sunlight. So this goes to show that not all vines are bad. There's a lot of native vines that I'll talk about here. So if you're trying to do restoration work in a park near you, make sure you're not just cutting all the vines from the trees, because they are an important part of our ecosystem. So this is where I'm going to talk about that bamboo that was mentioned earlier. So this is our native bamboo, also called river cane. A lot of the bamboo that you see in the landscape trade is invasive, but this is our native one. It's much slower growing, and the top height it reaches is like 10 to 12 feet. It likes to form cane breaks along streams, so this is exactly what we would want to see in this nature preserve, which is pretty cool. Another thing that you might notice, and you probably have seen and maybe haven't noticed before, is poison ivy growing up trees. It can often look like branches of a tree, which I tried to illustrate here by looking up. So a lot of times people will think that's the actual tree and then go over and touch it. But this is poison ivy. You can see the vine right here. This is a plant that a lot of people are familiar with, and you may not want in your house or in your yard, but it is great for wildlife. So it's great to have in a forest. It's only poisonous to us. So all other animals really utilize it. It produces berries that the birds love. This tree is called box elder, and it's often confused with poison ivy, especially when they're young, because it has 3 leaves, but this is actually a type of maple. This is one of the tallest and straightest trees that you'll see. I caught it in the video. I don't know if you guys saw it, but it's pretty distinguished because this tree in particular has 3 leaders. And a lot of times you'll see them with 2, but mostly 1. This is a tulip poplar. It grows like 80 to 120 feet upward. And it's called that because the flower forms a beautiful green and orange tulip. So then I started walking down the nature trail, and the first thing that you're going to notice walking down the nature trail is this grass in the understory. So this grass covers everything. It's an invasive called Japanese stilt grass, and it really likes to be near the water. So a little higher elevation, you'll notice that it's not growing there as much. So even if you pull it, it washes in with the floodplain, so it's super hard to remove. So we started planting ferns to try to compete with that grass. And one thing that you can try at home is we took a makeup brush and brushed the spores in the bottom of the fern and spread them into this plot after we had hand pulled the Japanese stilt grass. You can see it's grown back, but a lot of ferns came up. So it's a free way to get more ferns if you do it at the right time of year. So some native ground cover that we would want instead of the Japanese stilt grass would be these. So there's Virginia creeper, which is a vine. Some people get a reaction to it like poison ivy, but it's really rare. I've only known 1 person that has a reaction like that. This is our native grapevine, muscadine. So they both will climb up trees, but create ground cover as well. This is another native vine called American hog peanut, which I think looks kind of similar to kudzu, but it's much smaller. It's like the size of, smaller than your palm. They're cute little things. And then there's native crossvine and trumpet vine. So I showed you trumpet vine earlier, and then crossvine has a similar flower, but they bloom at different times. There's Cherokee sedge and river oats. River oats are starting to be used in landscaping, which is pretty cool. And then there was native pokeweed as well. So pokeweed's pretty cool because when it forms berries, you can use it to make beautiful dye, and it forms this beautiful magenta color. I made a watercolor last year. It's super easy, and it's something that the people that lived on this land first did. So I think that's pretty cool to feel connected with the land by doing kind of an old tradition. Across the bank, you'll see Chinese privet, which is commonly used as a hedge. So that kind of takes over the stream banks. So this is another really cool relationship. I mentioned poison ivy earlier. Another plant that you'll see out there is our native jewelweed. They grow next to each other, which is kind of funny because you can use jewelweed as a neutralizer for poison ivy. So it's often made into soap, which is pretty cool. Some plants that we planted there for restoration purposes is our native pawpaw and the native red buckeye. So pawpaw forms the largest native fruit in North America. You should try it if you haven't yet. You can't buy it at stores because it doesn't keep well because it's so soft. These are more invasives. This is another cool tree that you'll see. This is the largest tree or largest leaf in North America. So this whole thing right here is one leaf. And this is the devil's walking stick. It's a great tree in the summertime because it flowers in the summer, so it's great for pollinators. As well as this tree. So American basswood, this is kind of like the #1 tree for bees. So if you're really into pollinators and you want to promote pollinators, plant one of these. You plant one of these trees, it's equivalent to planting, I believe, 2 acres of clover. So that's how many flowers it produces, and pollinators really need these flowers in the summertime because they've got plenty in the springtime, but not as many flowering species, especially trees, in the summer. All right, I'm gonna finish here. I've got more things, but I'm overwhelming everyone with plants. But this is the one I'll end on. So this is a non-native, non-invasive that you'll see along the edges of a pathway. This is called plantain. And this is a really useful plant too, because this can help with bug bites. So it's often made into salves, which just means that this leaf is taken, crushed up, and then mixed with some oils to put on your skin, and it draws out a lot of the toxins and irritants that bugs will kind of like inject into your skin when they bite you. So that's all I've got for you guys. I have a lot more plant knowledge, so if you have any questions or you want to come volunteer with us and pester me with questions, I would love that.
Great. Thank you so much, Taryn, for sharing all your valuable information with us. We are running a little bit over, so we're going to have a quick 10-minute audience Q&A that will be led by Michelle Diaz. So you're welcome to put your questions for any of the speakers today in the chat box below, and we're going to have Michelle Diaz take over from here.
Hey, yeah, thank you everybody for those great presentations. So we have a few questions in the chat. One of the question is if there is a fee to enter the park, and also what are the hours to visit. So in Spanish, si necesitamos pagar si hay algún costo para la entrada al parque, cuáles son las horas de visita. Este parque es gratis para la comunidad. This is a free park. It's managed by the city of Atlanta. Nataki, do you know the specific hours for the park? Is it sunrise to sunset?
Yes, it sort of follows the policies of the other City of Atlanta parks, in that it's kind of dusk till dawn, so to speak, but it is free. I will say that it can feel very big and isolating, so it's definitely a place to visit with people, with a group, especially when it's your first time.
Sure. Thank you, Nataki. And then there's another question that I think, Taryn, you're probably the one that would like to answer this question. Any recommendations for landscaping a wooden backyard with native plants, trees?
Just landscaping in general. What kind of trees? Is that the question? Yeah,
it's a wooden backyard, and in there looking for some native plants and trees.
Yeah, I would love to give you a long list of shade tolerant plants, because I could kind of go on for forever. So I'll just put my email in the chat box, and then you can shoot me an email and I'll give you a long list of stuff.
Sounds good. Then another question, probably for Anna Marie. And Nataki also, how's the water quality in those creeks?
Nataki, do you want to answer this one?
Sure, I can take that one.
Okay.
The water quality, and I'm I'll be honest with you, I'm talking sort of off the top of my head right now. Generally speaking, we see better water quality in Utoy Creek than we see in some of our other creeks and streams on the west side, in part because of community efforts to eliminate combined sewage from this creek. I will say that in the past maybe 2 years, however, there have been a couple of instances where there were some sanitary sewer overflows, and that sort of comes from things like, people flushing what they think are disposable, baby wipes down toilets, or kind of fats, oils, and greases getting into our water system. So we have seen some of that in Utoy Creek, recently, and close to the preserve itself, close to the Beecher Hills Elementary School, which the trail and the preserve sort of backs up to. However, generally speaking, the water quality is what we would expect for urban streams, but it is slightly better than we see in some of our other urban streams, particularly on the west side, because it no longer has consistent impacts from combined sewer overflows. And that was also because our community members fought to make sure that combined sewers were eliminated from this watershed, and that both the community and water quality were protected in the process of doing that.
Thank you, Nataki. Another question here that I think I could open to all of the speakers of this event. It's acknowledging different cultures recreate in unique ways. Do we know or have knowledge of these preferences? And then how well or not do our park address this? If any of you would like to answer this question.
Could you repeat that question, Michelle?
Sure, and it's coming from the chat as well for everybody. Acknowledging different cultures recreate in unique ways. Do we know or have knowledge of these preferences? And then how well or not do our park address this?
So what I can provide in terms of what I know, I mean, I think maybe there are some generalities that we could, talk about with respect to the ways that different cultures, enjoy these types of spaces. What I can say in terms of this particular space, you see a lot of people who are walking primarily. Wawa does a monthly, or before the pandemic, we did a monthly walk with a doc program. And so it started off monthly, and then we moved to a weekly program, and we saw kind of increased interest in the community around us to do that program. So walking for kind of exercise and for stress relief, mental health, benefits, people definitely are into around this space in particular. There's also a playground on site that Wawa was helpful in getting installed years ago. And so people, families who have kids come and use the playground quite a bit. So it's kind of like a little hidden treasure, but for those who know about it, they come and use it frequently and have birthday parties and all kinds of things. But it's the type of space where, there's more so a lot of passive kind of recreation there, and not a whole bunch that's active outside of people sort of walking the concrete path and trail itself. And then there are, of course, guided hikes through some of the forested areas that you saw represented in the video earlier. And I don't know if others want to speak to preferences in terms of, other communities, but I just thought I'd talk about the folks who live in closest proximity to this site.
Sure, thank you, Nataki. And there's another question coming on the chat in Spanish. The question is, ¿existen señales en otros idiomas en el parque para dirigir a los visitantes? ¿Y cómo comunican al público acerca de las actividades en el trail? So maybe Adriana, you might be wanting to jump into this because you were visiting the park recently. If there are any signs in the park that are listed in other languages to guide visitors. So far, the parks that I've been in the park do not have any signs in other languages than English.
I love that question because I think it's a really good point to bring up. And I think one of the reasons why we wanted to have this event is that there really is no signs in parks with other languages. There may be some in other parts of the city, but I know that Hampton-Beecher didn't have them when I was there. So that's definitely a really good point to bring up. I think that's something that I would love to push for.
I agree. Yeah. And then the other question, ¿cómo comunican al público acerca de las actividades en el trail? If there's any communication to the public about the activities happening in the trail.
So for the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance, I invite you to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Again, the organization is West Atlanta Watershed Alliance. You can also see our website at www.wawa-online.org for information. I will say that right now we are not having a lot of public events in the park due to the pandemic. But as we're able to do that, sort of safely, that's the place where you can find out that information.
Yeah, and same for Trees Atlanta. If you would like to join Taryn and her team as a volunteer at this location, visit our website, treesatlanta.org, and you'll see all the opportunities listed on the calendar. And just as what Nataki mentioned, we're very limited right now on the amount of volunteers we take, the amount of projects, and we're not hosting any in-person tours or nature walks for now, but just stay in touch with us and maybe we'll keep offering some of these virtual experiences.
Great, thank you so much, Michelle. And I just want to say thank you to all of our great speakers today. And thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. It's very much appreciated. We do hope that this event has inspired you to go take a look at the Lionel Hampton-Beecher Hills Nature Preserve over here on the west side. And we all hope that you will get out and get some fresh air. And that's it for today. If you guys have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me, Adriana at parkpride.org, and I can get any questions that you have to our speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.